Hello and welcome to another edition of the Change Exchange. And we have someone here that you may know the voice more than you do the face. I'm not sure. But there's a new show in town, the Dan Nicholl Show on Supersport. How did that happen?
With a lot of effort and a lot of persistence, I think.
Where did the idea come from?
The idea came from two shows in Australia and New Zealand. I was a Rotary Youth Exchange student in 1995, which seems like a million years ago, as a 16-year-old leaving rural Zimbabwe and heading off to Australia. And I learned many, many things in that year. One of the things I experienced was a show in Australia called The Footy Show. It was an Australian rules football show, the game where they all wear very tight shorts and run around, and it's completely incomprehensible if you're not living in Australia. But I got to learn it. Correct. But I got to learn. I actually ended up playing a bit of Australian rules football because they didn't have rugby, which I'd played growing up in Zimbabwe. And I watched this show, and what for me was just so appealing was that it was a show where they didn't have the rights to show any footage, and so it was all about the personalities and the exchanges and creating a show where it was the conversation and the humour that was the key. And that sort of simmered with me, and I went down to university. I'd gone back to finish school in Zimbabwe, went down to university to Cape Town, and was working there on the UCT radio station and starting to find my feet a bit in the media space. And after the Absa Currie Cup final of, I think it was 2001, I got talking to Bob Skinstad. Province had just won the competition, and he was talking about a show called the Lion Red Sports Cafe, which was a very irreverent, very fun show in New Zealand. Probably most famous for creating National Nude Day in New Zealand, which I think gives you a feel for the kind of show it was. And we were talking about how there just wasn't anything in that space in South Africa. And so we set out to try and make it happen. We brought the guy from New Zealand out to South Africa. We filmed some stuff with him, filmed the pilot. We had a lot of fun with the guys. But I think it was just too soon for South African television, which was still a fairly conservative space then. And also nobody had a clue who I was. So my vision of myself as superstar presenter and director wasn't really shared by anyone else. But it sat and it simmered, and we had one or two more cracks at it along the way, and I did some other work on television. I hosted Champions League football. I did some ad hoc work here and there, worked a lot on radio. And then last year I sat down with a friend of mine, Kelvin Watt, also came out of Zimbabwe, although a long time before me. And we were talking about this, and he agreed that there was this space. He'd seen me working a lot as an MC, and he liked work that I'd done. And we said, well, let's give it a go. So we put some money into it. We made a pilot. And then a lady called Suzanne at BrightRock was daft enough to think it was a good idea to get behind the project. And lo and behold, just under a month ago now, the very first episode of the Dan Nicholl Show took flight.
And what did you feel like when you watched it?
It was a surreal experience. The actual filming, you'll know this better than most, when you're in studio, we've got a small studio audience, but it's a fairly intimate space. You're talking to 50, 60 people. It's not as overwhelming as people might think. If you've been on camera before, you get used to it. It was more the build-up, and is this really going to happen, and are we actually going to studio, and is the Dan Nicholl Show, especially as it started on the 1st of April 2015, really just Suzanne and Kelvin playing this enormous joke on me, and what was going to eventuate. And we record on a Tuesday night, the show goes out on a Wednesday night, and on the Wednesday night I had some of my closest friends and my family around. There were a dozen or so of us watching an extraordinarily large bottle of champagne, and we watched the show, and it was just an enormous sense of satisfaction. I thought the show went very well. There were lots of things we could improve, and I tend to look at these things with a very critical eye. But just watching it, see it play out, and thinking, that's kind of what I was thinking 13 years ago.
Amazing. And but it's quite a weird experience to see yourself on air doing things. It feels like a kind of weird double of yourself. It's not.
There's that sort of out-of-body experience.
Yes,
that's me.
Yes.
And why on earth aren't you sucking in your tummy and pushing your shoulders back when you're on TV? But I think, I've spent the better part of the last 15 years working a lot on a stage. I do a lot of work around the world as an MC and as a presenter. And so I'm kind of used to seeing myself in that space. I think it was more that for once I'd entirely defined that space. So I wasn't working for another brand or working for another event. This was me, and this was my passion, and this is what I really wanted to do. And to see that eventually come to fruition, and to see the response, the social media went bananas. I had messages from people I hadn't heard from in ages, and it just, all of a sudden, it didn't change life entirely, but it certainly put a new spin on it, and it was just a real sense of, this is something I've been working to for so long. And,
a really important step.
Yeah, it was a benchmark in the life of Dan Nicholl.
Okay, let's go right back to the beginning. I mean, your whole life was changed by a decision your parents made when you were 6.
Yeah, 4 actually. 4. I was born in Belfast in Northern Ireland in 1978, and Belfast in 1978 was a very troubled place. The troubles, what defined it was what it was known as, and that gap between the Catholic and the Protestant groups was so entrenched. The kind of difference is, it's almost like when people support football clubs, you support the club because your dad did and your granddad did and your great granddad did, and you don't really know why, but that's what you do. And that's kind of the sense, looking back now, that I got from Northern Ireland. And I had parents who were very liberal. They didn't want to lean on one side or the other. My father is from Northern Ireland, my mother is South African. She'd been born in Johannesburg, brought up in Cape Town, also a very liberal family. Her mother was one of the founders of the Black Sash, and they were members of the Liberal Party and used to knock on doors and get very abrupt responses. So I had a very liberal background, and when I got to the age of 4, 1982, I needed to go to school. And it was either a Protestant government school or a Catholic private school, and my parents felt that at the age of 4 I probably wasn't really ready to make that decision myself. So they had to look at some options. My father a teacher, my mother a librarian by trade, and they looked around, and they had 2 options. They'd actually moved to London in the interim. We were living with some friends waiting to decide where to go, and there were 2 decisions they were playing on, and they'd actually decided what they wanted to do, but they'd had an offer from the other choice, and they waited and they waited and they waited, and eventually it was D-Day for the second choice, and they said, right, we're going to Zimbabwe in 1982. The next day a letter came through offering the job in the Seychelles. So you could have been interviewing me as a bronzed lifeguard, but instead they went to Zimbabwe, and there's no small degree of retrospective irony there, in that they went out in a UK project to help the Zimbabwean government. Relationships now a little more frigid between those 2, but it took me out to a beautiful country, and I really got the best of Zimbabwe, and I had an amazing upbringing there.
And then you studied at UCT and did honours in English. Where were you going? I mean, not where you are now, I'm sure.
I mean, English literature is something that leaves you very well read and completely unemployable in a South African context.
I also have it.
And it was an interesting time. When I left, I was very lucky. When I was 16, I got a scholarship to go on Rotary Youth Exchange to Australia. Went over, had an incredible year, opened my eyes, and it told me I needed to go back to do my A-levels and work incredibly hard, because I knew that my school offered a single scholarship to university, and that was my only opportunity of getting to university. My parents as teachers didn't have the means otherwise. And so I went back, and I was incredibly boring for 2 years. I played cricket, played hockey, and studied. I just knew that I needed to get to university, and I was able to, and I managed to get that scholarship, and UCT was where I wanted to go. My uncle was the Deputy Vice Chancellor at the university. My mum had grown up there. We'd had holidays in Cape Town. My best friend was going there. And I went down initially wanting to do a drama degree. And I went down and they have what's called, I think it was a performing arts course. And I wanted to do English and performing arts. And I discovered when I got down there that you would have had to have gone down 6 months earlier for an audition. So I did drama for year 1, and I'm very glad it worked out that way, because after 6 months of learning how to play a depressed rabbit or a tree in a state of emotional flux, I realized this probably wasn't for me.
And you would be even less employable.
Indeed, completely. I'd be selling magazines at traffic lights. I had a look at my options, and I've always loved writing. My mum, from as long as far back as I can remember, used to read to us the Narnia books, the Tolkien books, just instilled a real love of books.
And of audio, of the spoken voice.
Yeah, look,
so that's how, that's where you went, to radio.
Well, our family has a collective history of a chronic inability to shut up, and that manifested itself in finding my way into radio. UCT has got a very strong radio station, and I'd done some work in Zimbabwe on radio as a student. And I'd done a lot of public speaking as an exchange student, so I discovered it was something I enjoyed, and UCT Radio gave me a platform. And
what's the best thing about radio? It's so different from television.
Yeah. For me, one of the really cool things about radio is that you don't have the visual element. I remember listening to a lot of the Goon Show and the things that they do, because it was just
all
audio.
in your head. Yeah.
And they can say things that visually make absolutely no sense, but in an audio sense are really funny or really cool or really different. And it's also a medium that offers you an enormous amount of freedom, because although visual gives you that image, it also restricts you to that image. Whereas radio, you can just run wild. And I had an enormous amount of fun on UCT radio.
And your first real job, what was that?
There are many who'd argue I haven't found that yet. My mother probably being amongst them. When I was coming to the end of my second year of radio, third year, so end of third year of UCT, by that stage I was hosting the Drive show on UCT radio, having a lot of fun, had managed to talk some reasonably famous people into coming onto the show, and I was really just loving it. And I got a phone call from Cape Talk asking me to come in for an audition, which I thought was really cool. And I went in and I did the audition and was kind of hoping that they might say, well, you know, this time next year we've got a slot at 4 a.m. on a Thursday and we'd like you to try out for it. The next morning I was running sport on the breakfast show.
Sure.
So
okay.
It was a fairly rapid transition.
And the sports interest? You said that you studied and played hockey and played rugby at school, so you were interested from
Yeah, one of my earliest memories is breaking French windows in our house in Kwekwe in Zimbabwe, having played the most magnificent cover drive or whipped a short delivery off my hips through mid-wicket, and instead of an adoring mother saying, timing was superb and you really are looking good off the front foot, she'd yell at me for breaking yet another window. And my childhood, cricket was always the sport.
Mothers are a bit strange.
I know, my mother really needed work there. Yeah, childhood was peppered with playing cricket in the garden, playing cricket in the net. So I had a cricket ball in a sock, and I must have racked up thousands of hours just playing that cover drive and imagining who I was playing against and which test match I was involved in, and a very vivid imagination.
So once you started working in that field, you understood what it meant. It wasn't just a from the outside. You had really lived it.
To a degree. I mean, I never played sports at a level high enough to be able to completely identify with a Protea or a Springbok or a Bafana player. But I was at the Zimbabwe Cricket Academy and I played a reasonable level, certainly enough to enjoy it and have a degree of proficiency. But also just to understand the passion and to understand what sport does and how the emotions of it. I often look at South Africa, which is a completely bipolar country. But Bafana wins and the stock exchange is up and we're floating on air and the country is lovely and we all love each other. You know, the Proteas lose and we're depressed and we set fire to each other and want to throw coaches out windows. And you know, we're exactly like that, and that is the power of sport. And I think that's what appealed so much.
And the life of a sport commentator, I mean, you couldn't have been home much.
So when I started out, there was a degree of travel. I used to do rugby commentary for Cape Talk, which was incredibly partisan commentary because it was for a Cape Town audience. There was not a shred of neutrality in sight. And I look back with no great pride on some of the comments about referees that I might have made on radio once or twice. But it wasn't an enormous amount. I was working as well as with Cape Talk with iafrica.com as their sports editor. It was actually mostly based in Cape Town. It was when I decided that, to my mum's horror, I was going to give both of those jobs up and try and make it as an MC, something she just didn't understand at all.
How did that happen? Why?
So when I was at university, there are a lot of things that happen on campus, the Rag Olympics being a great example. Lots of students, usually fueled by a little bit too much beer, doing crazy things like pushing shopping trolleys around campus and just having fun. It's a great bonding experience and an integral part of your discovery of university life. And by second year, when I was looking after the radio's Drive show at UCT, I was invited to start hosting them, and then companies would come along and they'd want somebody to promote their product on university, and I'd often be the person asked. And then I got asked by IX Cape Town, a newly formed football club in Cape Town, if I could do their stadium announcing. And so I ended up doing that for 4 or 5 years, which was a tough job because quite frequently there'd be teams who'd come down to play in Cape Town from the Eastern Cape, for instance, who had reams of players with not a vowel to be seen and just this range of clicks that I was completely incapable of mastering.
Did you ever learn it?
I did my best. There were some of them. I remember there was a guy called, his surname was spelled Ncaca. which to the Anglophile is simply Nkaka. And the first and the second clicks were completely different. So one was the roof of the mouth and one was the side of the mouth. And after 5 years, if there was one name I still struggled with, it was Gareth Blackman.
But so you got drawn into that world, and how did you figure out that this could actually be a viable career choice?
I remember going to a launch for Vodacom sponsoring the Stormers. They took over the sponsorship and they were launching in New Jersey, and it was a very upmarket affair. They had it in an art gallery, which was completely absurd for a rugby event, but that's where they had it. And there was a guy by the name of Thomas Abt, and I'd met Thomas once or twice. He was always quite quiet, looked very cool. I knew he was quite important. He looked after Vodacom's sponsorships. I didn't realize he didn't actually work for Vodacom. He worked for an agency. I didn't know how any of that worked. I just knew that he was the person I needed to get to know. And I'd started to MC a few little charity golf days. They'd gone fairly well. People had chuckled a bit, and it looked like it was something I kind of had the hang of. And emboldened by 1 or 2 free beers at the event, I cornered Thomas and insisted that he employ me to host his Vodacom Origins Golf Series. Now, this was the definitive, and I think still is the definitive amateur golf experience in South Africa. You get to go to a great resort, play with professionals, and here was this kid still at university who nobody had ever heard of, who was trying to tell him that he was the person who should be at the helm. And I don't to this day know what Thomas was thinking. But he gave me that job, and he gave me a crack at it. And I remember standing up for the stage on the first time. I think I was out in Somerset West, was the first event, and suddenly thinking, hey, these are some of the biggest business people in South Africa. These are South Africa's top golfers. It's one of the strongest brands in the country, and they've got me looking after
what
all
was
of
I
this.
thinking?
But it turned out to be a fairly natural space, and it turned out that if you make people laugh, if you take the mickey out of yourself before you take the mickey out of anybody else, if you don't take things too seriously, and if you understand what a brand is about and what they're trying to get to, and if you can get that combination, that it's actually something that you can turn into earning a living. And a couple of years after that, more and more events had started piling up, people wanting me to do stuff, and it was getting increasingly difficult to be on radio a couple of hours a day and to be running an editor's job at a big website for 10 hours a day plus weekends, and then get away to different parts of the country. And so it was a big leap of faith, and
because this is completely freelance. It's the phone must ring, otherwise it doesn't happen.
And you can't always call back because you've run out of money and airtime. And it's there were a few months after that where it was a bit touch and go. I'd bought myself a little apartment, and I had a second-hand car, and I was paying for both of those myself. And there were a few months where it was a bit nerve-wracking, and where it certainly wasn't French restaurants for dinner, but it was something that I always believed I could do, and it worked, and it kicked in, and it was a lot of hard work, and you ended up doing a lot of events for no or little money, simply because you felt it was going to help you in the long run. It did help in the long run, and now I get to do events around the world, and I get to meet some incredibly cool people, and I have a great deal of fun.
Tell me about the Laureus ambassadorship.
That's a really proud moment. I've been fortunate enough over the years to develop a friendship with Johan Rupert, who is a man who has done an extraordinary amount for South Africa. I don't think he often gets the credit he deserves, often very quietly behind the scenes. And I'd been invited up to host his Alfred Dunhill Championship event at Leopard Creek as the MC. And a few years later, I was emceeing the wedding of a friend of mine, Richard Sterney, the professional golfer. And we were having a couple of drinks with Richard and with Johan and 1 or 2 others. And again, and there seems to be something of a trend, rather boldly, I told him he should take me to Scotland to MC his Dunhill event, this big A-list Hollywood star event. And he picked up the phone, and 3 minutes later I was confirmed to do the event.
And the dog had caught the bus.
Correctly. So that kind of really entrenched the relationship. And Johan started Laureus about 15, 16 years ago now as a space where sport could be used for the power of good. And I'd done a bit with Laureus. I'd visited their events. I'd visited the work that they do, the projects they support. And last year I was invited to become an ambassador. And Laureus has 2 spaces. It has the academy, some of the great sports stars of the world, from Boris Becker to Sean Fitzpatrick to Morné Duplessis to Sachin Tendulkar. It's just an extraordinary array of people. And they're also ambassadors around the world. And they support the Laureus World Sports Awards, basically the Oscars of sport. But then they also support 160 odd projects around the world, 16 of them being here in South Africa. And throughout my life, sport changed my life, essentially. It gave me a career path, and although I don't exclusively work in sports events, that was certainly the impetus that got me into the area of what I do now. And Laureus just does such great work with kids, with projects, with, to quote Madiba when he was at the first Laureus Awards, harnessing the power of sport to change the world.
Well, don't we know it from the 95 World Cup? Among other things.
And 96 and 2007 and 2010 and every time South Africa does well. And so for me, to be able to take something I love, which is sport, and then to take the ability to contribute a little bit to positive change and to go and meet these kids in these projects, and not just in South Africa. In my travels, I've visited projects in the favelas in Rio, in the Bronx in New York, in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I've seen that although the problems are often different, the solution remains the same. It's getting sport to break down a barrier, to distract, to channel energy into the right space, and to give kids who, in so many places around the world, don't have the simple ability to play or to have a family or support structure or to have safeguards against the ever-encroaching social ills. Here is sport giving them an opportunity to escape, to divert, to see a better and brighter future. And Laureus is something I believe in enormously. I'm incredibly proud to be a small part of the organisation, and every day it's just great to see how it's making such a difference.
And in the process, you got tutored by a 9-year-old to surf.
Yeah. I visited the Waves for Change project with Stuart Taylor, another good friend of BrightRock. Stuart's a very old friend of mine. He's an incredibly funny man, one of South Africa's best comedians. He's got a very wry outlook on life. And Stuart grew up in the Cape Flats. As he said in a number of his shows, I couldn't swim because I wasn't allowed on the beaches. And I grew up in Zimbabwe. We certainly did swim, but I'm by no means massively proficient. And down we went. Neither of us had ever surfed before, and we went down with these kids and with Roxy Lowe, the model and surfer. He's a very good friend of mine, and together with the kids, Roxy gave us this lesson. And you have these little children who are sort of really 9-year-old gangsters. They've come from broken homes. They've seen enormous amounts of violence. They've seen things at a child of that age never should see, should never have to experience. And one very sobering moment, I had this little 9-year-old say to me, one of the great things about surfing, and he was very earnest as he said it, is that now that I'm surfing, I'm not doing drugs anymore. When a 9-year-old kid says that to you, it really gives you a sobering dose of perspective. And I kind of framed what we did. The piece that we put together for TV was quite light-hearted. It was me falling repeatedly off my surfboard and Stuart falling almost as often. But just having some fun. But inside of that was a message, and here are some kids who are just really having fun. The project Waves for Change, the guys who run it describe it as surf therapy. And that's what it's doing. It's just easing some of the stress and trying to give these kids an outlet. And to see it at work and to be a little part of it was made for a very special day.
Tell me about your family. Where did you meet your wife?
This is a pretty cool story, and it sounds as though it's made up. And although a lot of what I say is, this is not. And
we can ask her.
You can. Well, she's a lawyer, so I have to make sure I'm honest when I'm talking about her. Actually, let me go back to her side of it first. So she went to university in Durban. One of her very good friends, Cindy, had moved to London, met a South African there, Richard. They got married, living happily in 4 square foot in Wimbledon, as South Africans in London do, and dreaming of moving back to South Africa one day. And they would go on holiday quite often, try and take some time to explore a bit of Europe, and they'd put together a group holiday in Portugal on the Algarve coast. They'd booked a villa, off they go, Portugal being a very reasonable place to go to, even by South African standards. Their economy makes ours look quite robust. So they'd booked this place to go to, and with about 2 months to go, Richard, big Italian, drinks beer, plays rugby, plays golf, real boy's boy, discovered to his absolute horror Out of the 10 people going so far, with 2 left, there was only one other guy for his golf and beer drinking holiday. His brother-in-law, who was bringing his 18-month-old daughter, who didn't drink and who didn't play golf.
Oh dear.
So he was the worst possible companion. And he said to his wife, you speak to your friends who are coming on the trip, find a couple of guys who can come and play golf with me and give me a slightly more entertaining holiday. And one of the women in question was my now wife. And she got hold of one of my best mates in Cape Town. They'd been to school together in the Free State. He had ran his own business. He was newly single, looking for a holiday. Fantastic, come along. Anybody else you know? Well, said Grant, I've got this mate who doesn't really have a proper job, but he always seems to be quite happy to go anywhere. So he phoned me up. I checked my diary. I had to be hosting an event in Scotland the week after, changed my flights, went to see some clients in London, and then flew into Barcelona to go and meet Grant and Dimitra, his school friend, before going on to Portugal. And Grant had sent me an email saying, she's really beautiful and she's this incredible Greek beauty. And if your mate says someone's really beautiful, they're normally about 300 kilograms with a beard, and it's your mate trying to wind you up. So yeah, whatever. So I was sending back emails. Oh, she's going to fall in love with me. She's got no chance. Dan on fire. And he sent me an email back telling me that if I so much as looked at her, he'd break my legs. He's very protective. She's like kind of little sister to him. So we'll go across. I arrive in Barcelona. They've been there a couple of days, and Grant gets off the bus as I'm meeting them at a point, and then this vision of Greek beauty walks off the bus, and she took my breath away. Give me a second. Sure.
How long ago was that?
So that was. She's gonna kill me for doing this. That was 2009. In fact, I remember she walked off the bus, and I remember the perfect moment as I gave her a hug. How are you? And she looked up at me, she smiled, and she said to me, do you know where the nearest toilet is? I'm absolutely desperate. And those were her very first words. And we spent the afternoon on a tourist bus going through Barcelona and just having an amazing time. And that night we went to a restaurant in Barcelona. If you're ever in Barcelona, Passeig del Pep, Spanish seafood restaurant. It's one of the best restaurants in Barcelona. Food critic in South Africa had recommended it. And I managed to find it, and in my very broken Spanish somehow booked a table. We got there 10 o'clock at night. We had an incredible night out, and something just sparked that day. And exactly 1 year later to the day, in the very same restaurant in Barcelona, I dropped down to one knee. She thought I'd dropped the camera. And I very clearly, she didn't say yes. She said, have you asked my father? Being a good Greek.
And what did her dad say?
I said, I haven't asked your father, I've asked your parents. And they both said yes, and they're very excited. And so she said,
quite old-fashioned to approach the parents first.
I don't know that it is. I think it's a really important thing to do, and I think it's important to families because you don't marry somebody.
And you knew them by then.
Yeah,
and
very well.
You knew that they would welcome you.
Yeah, I mean, they've been amazing. My mother-in-law, she's homicidal, and that she's Greek and tries to feed me every time I move. She's the only person on earth who thinks that I'm chronically underweight. But I love her dearly, and they're an amazing story themselves. They're an arranged marriage from a village in Greece, and they've been married now for over 40 years and are as close and loving and devoted as any couple I know. So they were a great example to me, and I knew that they would be happy. It was quite a nerve-wracking experience, more so than I thought it would be to ask. But yeah, she said yes. We then spent a week on a cruise in the Mediterranean. Thankfully, she did say yes, or it could be the most awkward cruise in history. But yeah, that was, seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago, all in one.
And you have a new baby daughter, Erin.
I do. In the objective opinion of her father, she is the single most beautiful little girl in the history of the world ever. She is now 9.5 months, getting full of character, crawling around everywhere. She's an incredibly good little girl. From 6 weeks, she's gone to sleep at 8 o'clock at night and woken up at 8 o'clock the next morning. She's just slept through the night.
You are blessed.
We are indeed. And yeah, it's everybody tells you, and it's enormously cliched, oh, your life's going to change. And it's normally said sort of as a harbinger of doom. Life is going to end, and you won't see a restaurant for a decade, and you won't sleep for longer than that. And it certainly does change, but it changes in the most wonderful way. And you've got absolutely no idea of what it's going to lead to.
So are you a hands-on dad?
In as much as I can be. One of the challenges of what I do is that I'm frequently traveling, and I'm away a lot. I remember when Erin was, I think she was a month and a half old. One of my very close friends from school in Zimbabwe was getting married in Grenada in the West Indies, and it just wasn't feasible for Dee and Erin to come along. But he'd asked me to be the MC at his wedding, and we'd known each other since junior school. So I went over for the wedding, but it was a 2-week round trip getting through America, over to the Caribbean, all the way back. And I realized that I was going to be away for 25% of my daughter's life to date, which was a mortifying statistic. And since then, it's a balance you try and strike, and I'd like to think I get it reasonably right. I'm getting more requests to do events internationally, which is fantastic, but it does mean you're away from home. But when I am at home, it's odd, and I don't do it too often, but changing that first nappy in the morning and just that hands-on and seeing your daughter smile when you hear her waking up in the morning, and we'll often just play together. A number of meetings that I've been late for because I picked up Erin to say goodbye, and 15 minutes later we're still wrestling on the couch or playing with the dog or just having some fun together.
And touch is so important, I think, for both. For you and for her.
She's a very animated little girl. She talks a lot like her mum and dad, and she loves being with, and she's great with people. My family are all overseas, but my wife's family, her brother and his wife and her sister are in Johannesburg, and we're very close. And Erin is very lucky in having those aunts and uncles around, playing with her and looking after her.
The other thing that people tell you that you cannot understand before it happens is that adults don't create children. Children create adults. You grow up. You have to. You have to suddenly become responsible.
I think that's entirely true, but you also it also brings out that incredibly youthful side in you, and that I now find myself dancing in the living room trying to entertain my daughter, or singing off key with great enthusiasm, and it rejuvenates you. My wife in particular, she's a director at a big law firm. She's a very successful lawyer. I've never won an argument with her. She'll come home after a long day and she's been fighting with somebody or been in court and it's been stressful. And 5 minutes later, she's just laughing because Erin has wiped away that day and given her a clean slate.
But what I also found in my personal experience, that if you're both very busy and often away, you have to make a conscious effort to connect, to spend time, to really be there when you're home.
I don't know that it's been that conscious. I think I get home and it's just the first thing I want to do. We live in an age where your instincts are so often to check your phone and to check your laptop, and I'm guilty of that regularly. But when I come home, where's Erin? And then we've got, my wife believes we've got a second child. We have a year-old bull mastiff puppy called Stavros, who is Erin's best friend. He guards if she's sleeping, he sleeps next to her cot. And so when I get home, Stavros wants attention because he misses me desperately, and I want to see Erin and say we have a little family get together. And I haven't ever felt that it's something I've needed to prioritize. It's something that I've just wanted to do. I was in Shanghai last week and I had a terrific time, and it's a great city and I had lots of fun, but I was getting on the plane and I can't wait to see my wife and my daughter and that horse that lives in my back garden masquerading as a puppy.
Where's your home and how did you come across it?
We live in Parkhurst in Johannesburg. When I moved to Cape Town, I lived there for a long time, but then when I met my wife, between her and my agent who'd been trying to move me up to Johannesburg for some time, I moved up here in 2010, and we'd looked for a house for a long time. We liked Parkhurst. It had that village feel to it.
It's a lovely area. It
had shades of echoes of Cape Town, and we probably spent 8-9 months looking for just the house we wanted.
What were you looking for? What's the most important thing?
Somewhere that didn't have Roman marble pillars in the bedroom. People's taste is completely beyond my scope of comprehension sometimes. You'd arrive at a house and outside, oh, this is fantastic. It's kind of what we want, the right sort of space. It's the right area. And you'd walk inside and you discovered that they'd turned the spare bedroom into a feng shui garden with an indoor waterfall. And there really was some ghastly stuff out there. We needed somewhere that just felt right. And you can't really, you want a set number of bedrooms and you want a bit of space, but it's more just you walk and you think, this could be our home. And obviously one that fell within the price range that we felt we could work with. And we're very lucky we both work, so it did give us a little bit of scope and leeway. And we found a place and we put in a bid and we were very excited, and they phoned us and told us that somebody else had put in a higher bid and it had been sold. We were pretty upset because we'd spent a lot of time, we really liked it, but we soldiered on, we looked at other places, and then about 6 weeks later, an incredibly shy and slightly embarrassed estate agent phoned us up because the same agent had told us with a certain degree of pomp and ceremony that our bid hadn't been high enough, and it turned out that the other person hadn't been able to get the finance. Would we still be interested? Yes, but we'll be offering less. So we sent in a lower bid, and the people needed to sell the house, and we were able to make that offer, and they took it, and we moved in.
And what's the nicest part of your house? Where do you spend time?
My wife would probably suggest the couch. There are a couple of areas. I've got an outside study at the back that is part study, part wine cellar. I'm a very keen wine collector. I've got a fairly large collection. It seems to diminish whenever I'm away from home, and my wife has a key to it. So that's a working area. But we've got a very open flow home. We love having people around. We love having friends around. And often it has to be kind of on our terms, because I'll look at my diary and I've only got 4 free nights this month. So that Thursday, let's see which of our friends are available to come around. And I love cooking. A good friend of mine, Pete Goffwood, the MasterChef judge, taught me to cook, introduced me to cooking, and I have a lot of fun. So my kitchen is somewhere I like to spend time, out on the deck, on the patio, around the braai. It's more just with the people, whether it's my wife, my daughter, my dog, with close friends. It's a very homely home, and it's a home that people feel comfortable in and relaxed in, and for me that's really important.
Dan, thank you so much. This was, I enjoyed it enormously. I hope you did.
I did, and I hope I didn't come across as too starstruck, because I always watched Carte Blanche growing up, and it's really special to spend some time with you.
Thank you, and good luck for your show.
Thank you very much.
Hope it goes well.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Ruda.
Till next time. Bye-bye.